You scroll past 100 faces before breakfast. You sit in traffic surrounded by strangers who will never know your name. You live in a building stacked with people you've never spoken to, separated by a few inches of drywall. None of this should feel normal, but the real answer is far stranger than discomfort. It's a warning, and it already played out once in full inside a box. In 1968, a scientist built a paradise for mice. His name was John Calhoun, and his paradise had a strange clinical name, Universe 25. It was a metal enclosure roughly the size of a small room, but for mice it was the size of a continent. Unlimited food, unlimited water, perfect temperature, no predators, no disease, nothing to fear, and nothing to want. Calhoun released 4 breeding pairs of mice into this world and stepped back to watch. At first, exactly what you'd expect happened. The population exploded. More food than any mouse could need, more space than any mouse could use. No reason not to reproduce. Every 55 days, the population doubled. New mice everywhere. A booming, thriving little civilization. Then, something started to go wrong. Not from lack of resources, there was still more food than the mice could eat, more water than they could drink, more space than they technically needed. The problem wasn't scarcity, the problem was density. Even in a world built for abundance, there's a ceiling on how many bodies can occupy the same space before something in the social fabric starts to tear. Around day 315, population growth began to slow. Not because mice were dying of starvation, because something in their behavior had fundamentally changed. Male mice, once territorial and purposeful, started withdrawing. Some stopped defending territory entirely and simply gathered in tight, passive clusters at the center of the enclosure, doing nothing, going nowhere, waiting. Calhoun called them the beautiful ones. They looked perfect, sleek coats, no scars from fighting, no visible stress, and they had completely stopped participating in normal mouse life. No mating, no nest building, no social hierarchy. Just existing, in a crowd, forever. Meanwhile, other males became hyper-aggressive, attacking without the usual social rules that normally limit mouse violence. Females, overwhelmed by the chaos around their nests, began abandoning their young or attacking their own pups. Mothers who had successfully raised litters before suddenly couldn't or wouldn't. The behaviors that had reliably sustained the species for generations simply stopped working. Calhoun had a term for what he was watching. He called it the behavioral sink. Not a population collapse from famine, not a population collapse from disease. A population collapse from something closer to social exhaustion. Too many individuals packed too closely for too long without any of the natural pressure valves that normally regulate crowded animal life, like migration, or territory expansion, or simply leaving. By day 600, birth rates had crashed to nearly zero. The population that had once doubled every 55 days began to decline, then kept declining, even though food and water remained untouched and abundant, right up until the very end. Universe 25 didn't die from lack of resources. It died from something that looked a lot more like the collapse of a society that had simply run out of room to function. Calhoun wasn't just a mouse researcher. He was trying to say something about crowding itself, as a force, independent of scarcity. A psychologist named Jonathan Friedman spent years testing whether Calhoun's findings applied to humans in any meaningful way, and his results were more complicated than Calhoun's original theory suggested. Friedman's experiments found that raw density alone, people simply packed into a small space, didn't reliably cause the same kind of breakdown. What seemed to matter more was something subtler, whether people felt a loss of control over their social environment. Crowding became stressful, not simply because there were many bodies nearby, but because there were too many social demands, too many interactions a person couldn't choose or escape, happening all at once. This distinction matters because it reframes what Calhoun's mice were actually showing us. It probably wasn't square footage that broke Universe 25, it was the collapse of meaningful social roles. Every mouse in that enclosure eventually had to interact with far more other mice than any mouse brain had evolved to track, negotiate, or manage. There was no escape, no new territory to claim, no way to opt out of the constant, unfiltered exposure to everyone else's presence. Does any of that sound familiar? A zoologist named Desmond Morris looked at crowded, dense human cities through almost the exact same lens Calhoun used for his mice, and called modern urban humans a kind of captive species, living inside an environment we built for ourselves but never fully adapted to. Not literally trapped the way Universe 25's mice were sealed inside metal walls, but functionally surrounded all the time by more faces, more voices, more social information than any human nervous system evolved to comfortably process. Think about what a normal day actually asks of you. Hundreds of strangers glimpsed on a commute, dozens of notifications demanding some kind of social response, an endless scroll of other people's lives, opinions, arguments, and updates, all competing for the same limited attention your brain evolved to give a tribe of perhaps 50, maybe 150 people at most. That number isn't arbitrary. It roughly matches what anthropologists call the natural size of a human social group, the number of relationships a human brain can meaningfully track and maintain. You are not built to hold thousands of faces in your social awareness, but modern life asks you to every single day whether you're ready or not. And so certain patterns start to emerge that should look uncomfortably familiar. Withdrawal. People quietly opting out of dating, out of deep friendship, out of forming new relationships at all, retreating instead into passive, low effort consumption, watching other people's lives instead of building their own. Calhoun's beautiful ones, sleek and untouched and doing nothing, have a modern echo in every person who scrolls for hours without speaking to another human all day. Hyper-aggression in narrow, disinhibited spaces. Comment sections and anonymous platforms where ordinary people say things to strangers they would never say to someone's face. The social restraints that normally regulate behavior dissolved by the sheer faceless density of everyone shouting into the same small digital room. None of this means modern cities are doomed, or that density itself is destiny. Friedman's research made that clear. Crowding alone doesn't break people. What breaks people is crowding without agency, too many social obligations, too little control over when and how you engage with them, and no clear way to step back. Which means the fix was never really about finding more physical space. It's about finding room to choose. The mice in Universe 25 had unlimited food and water, but zero ability to opt out of unrelenting social contact. Humans, unlike mice, can build that option back in. A walk without a phone. A conversation that isn't happening across a screen to 50 people at once. A boundary that says, quietly, I am allowed to be unavailable sometimes. Calhoun eventually built more universes, and none of them ended differently. The behavioral sync wasn't a fluke. It was what happens when a social species loses the ability to regulate its own exposure to itself. You are not a mouse in a box. You have something Calhoun's mice never had: the ability to notice the pattern before it finishes playing out. You scroll past 100 faces before breakfast, but unlike them, you can choose, today, to put the phone down and go find just one.